started? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you all so much for coming to our didactic at the very end of the day. We really appreciate your sticking it out with us. I am Maggie Samuels-Kalo. I'm an associate professor at Harvard Medical School and vice chair for research at the Mass General Brigham System. And I am joined by some amazing friends and colleagues to talk about optimizing your CV and preparing for promotion. So I will let them introduce themselves.
So I'm Michelle Cooper. I'm a professor of medicine at UCLA. There you go. Can you hear me? Ooh. A professor of emergency medicine. Hi, Ags. At UCLA. I am research director there. And I look at a lot of CVs for a lot of reasons and write at least 5 promotion letters for people across the country every year. So hopefully we can sort of give you some pearls for that.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lean-Ellett. I'm a professor and vice chair of faculty affairs and inclusive excellence at the University of Cincinnati, and was former chair of our ARPT committee, or promotions committee. So I've seen a lot of CVs, and I give a lot of feedback on CVs now. So thanks for coming.
I feel like very inexperienced next to all these women. Amy Zidon, it's nice to meet you all, or see you all. I am at Emory. I just got promoted, so that's why it's helpful to be at this talk, to associate professor. So I'm happy to share some tips and tricks for those of you who are on your way up.
Awesome. So we're going to talk today about sort of why we care about the CV in particular, which will be very brief because I think we all have some contextual knowledge to share there. We'll talk about how to develop and maintain a high-quality CV, how do you optimize your CV for promotion, and then importantly, how do you talk about any potential career or CV gaps, and how do you address non-traditional CV content. And then we'll talk about what you do after you have the CV. So how do you have the discussion about promotion with your departmental leadership, and we'll try and leave time for all of your questions. I have, mentored by my millennial mentees, attempted to create a QR code that will let you put your questions on the Jamboard. There's like a maybe 20% chance that this will work, but if it does work, I would super appreciate if you could put your questions here, what CV challenges you've had and what questions you have. And then I'll try and kind of collate them during while my colleagues are speaking, and then we can try and make sure that all of your questions are addressed at the end. If that doesn't work, we'll just have a more traditional, old school Q&A at the end. So let's see if it works. So why do we focus on the CV, right? Because it is the unit of academic currency. It is what you use for promotion. It's what you use when you're negotiating for a new job or with your chair. Many of us have to submit it yearly as part of an annual career conference. It's what we submit on your behalf when we're nominating you for awards. It's effectively the outward-facing explanation of your work, and you want it to highlight all of your achievements and accomplishments in the most positive way that it can. But we also focus on the CV because we think of it as a tool to address long-standing disparities in promotion in academic medicine. Here I present the data really just focused on gender, and you can see that we've made some progress by gender, but not a ton between 2015 and 2017 in terms of moving women up the academic ladder from assistant to associate to full professor. And this is just another way of looking at the same data where they're basically trying to say that the red line going across is parity, and you can see emergency medicine is in dark blue, and we have not yet reached parity across gender. And so having optimized CVs, and particularly CVs that are optimized for potentially alternate career paths, lets us have one more tool in our armamentarium to advocate for promotion and move the needle forward towards equity. So when we think about where does the problem happen, where are we losing people in what used to be called a leaky pipeline and is now called a branching pathway, or something that has slightly more positive implications than a pipeline, when we look at across 9 specialties, as people move from a resident to an assistant professor, they seem to advance with parity across genders. But no specialty demonstrated parity and advancement for the assistant professor to associate professor or the associate professor to professor transition. So that seems to be really where we are most losing people, and where we have the opportunity to use the CV as a chance to highlight both your traditional and your non-traditional accomplishments to help you move along this pathway. And that's what we're going to focus on today. All right, I'll pass it off to Dr. Cooper.
On that happy note, we'll talk about sort of what you can do, but I think some of the most important things that I sort of see is sort of people don't really think about that, especially early in their career. You get an academic job, and you're like, got the academic job, just got to figure it all out, and you're like, I'll figure out what I need to do for my promotion down the road, and you kind of get behind until someone takes a look, and they're like, you're not ready, and you don't want to be in that position. So no one, I repeat, no one is going to care more about your promotion than you will. So take care of yourself, and it's sort of starting with good hygiene when you start your career will sort of save you as you go through. And I sort of think of it in a couple of different ways, just like sort of your retirement, right? So when you first start, figure out your retirement stuff and start putting your money away. So you can get your compound interest, you're sort of thinking about it. And when I think about I think about the same thing as diversifying your portfolio and setting yourself up for success as you move through. So you need to know the lay of the land. So know the lay of the land at your institution, and it's very different across institutions, how things are weighted, what counts, how much you need to do. Even though you can look at the website for your institution and sort of do it, but you should have an understanding of that. You should also have a little bit of understanding of the lay of the land, sort of it's like the pond that you swim in and the big ocean that's sort of out there, because you may not be at the same place. And so thinking about that is important. Knowing what's important to your chair is important, because that's sort of what gets you sort of places. And it all fits into like these three categories as you think about it. It's sort of service, education, scholarly productivity is sort of the general categories of how you'll think about it. And you want to hit all of those areas. Now you may be very focused on one area, you're sort of an education expert, and that's okay. You want your passion to lead what you do, just don't neglect some of the other areas that you sort of need to sort of do. And then the most important thing is capture everything you do. I'm at a place where sort of we used to be under medicine, and we were sort of the piddling department of emergency medicine. No one really cared what you did. And so you kind of got promoted. They were sort of like, we don't really want to bother. And for the first probably decade, no one looked at my stuff or told me anything. I didn't keep track of most of what I did. I'm still a full professor, so I didn't make it, but it's not necessarily what I would say, and it's not necessarily what people do now. And so we'll talk about the things you can do to get yourself set. So when you think about sort of your CV, I think everything should be sort of make it easy. So there's a parallel structure for each section in each of these areas, and it's chronological order, and then usually either big to small or small to big. So what you're doing locally, at your own sort of place, what you're doing sort of in the area, then your national, and then international. Make it readable. At our institution, there is a set template for your CV. You don't deviate. It is Times New Roman 12 font, and that is sort of what it is. So look and sort of set yourself up. But within that, you can make it readable. So there's big headings, and then I try and organize stuff in sort of smaller subheadings, because other people are going to look at your work, and it sort of will help them to sort of make it through and find out where are your areas of focus, and what are you doing for your institution versus how are you known sort of nationally. And then highlight your awards. So the things that you don't think about. You got Best Abstract. That should be sort of recognized. You had a paper that got talked about in a podcast. You didn't do the podcast, but you do want to recognize that this is work. You had the most downloaded article this month. Those are things that are really sort of highlight who you are, that you want to make sure you're keeping track of. The don'ts, avoid distracting fonts, what you think might be sort of like cute. DBGS, don't be George Santos. It is important that you get recognized for what you do. Important not to embellish. As I said, I look at a lot of CVs, and in my other role, when I'm not sort of in my academic setting, I'm an editor at Annals. So I see CVs, and I know a lot of editors, and I've seen CVs where someone's like, they're on the editorial board of, I'm like, oh, like that is actually public knowledge. Any journal you can go to and see what their editorial board is, and I sort of like, I'm like, this person is not on the editorial board of this journal. What you do matters, and sort of at my institution, like when I do peer reviews for other journals, I'm not an ad hoc reviewer for BMJ forever. I did a review this year or whatever year, and so you have to keep track of those things. Avoid acronyms. Not everyone who's reading your CV or part of the committee is going to be actually in your niche area, and they may not know what it is. And then when you are going for promotion, especially for the bigger steps, there are external people who are going to be evaluating your CV, and institution-specific language makes it difficult for them to know, is this important? What does this mean? So quickly, so we sort of can get through stuff, your CV sort of like should follow a template. So there's sort of your demographics, who you are, where you trained, what your titles are, your honors and awards. And then there's sort of service. This gets back to what we talked about before, having sort of it organized by category. So the local, the national, and then sort of health systems, school of medicine. And this is the area sometimes where I see people have gaps and they don't sort of know. And this is an area where it's actually pretty easy to get involved. I mean, you're sort of here at SAEM. So if SAEM is your jam, or CORD or AEM, you could join here, pretty much any of the interest groups. They all have committees. And you sort of figure out, do the things that are important to you, but this adds service. So you can moderating at a national meeting is service to your sort of organization. Reviewing abstracts is service. So if you're looking at your CV and you're sort of diversifying, you're like, I don't have a lot of service, that's sort of something easy to do. And if you like to do editing or peer review, that's actually a great way to sort of do service and get known. And don't forget sort of the community and volunteer work you do. That's important to the institution of how most places, how they see us. And then the other area that I see people leave off a lot is mentoring. This is core to what we do. And different institutions have different ways in which they like to see this, but you want to keep track of the people you mentor. And this is not like I had a 1-hour lunch with a student, but someone you have a longitudinal relationship with, who you help them with a research project, a resident here in Vitae for, a career faculty member somewhere else. And so I keep track of all of those things. And at my institution, I have to actually report each time I go, my dossier goes in, what I did for diversity. So I keep track of who the people I mentor are in terms of, is it sort of someone who is sort of underrepresented, is important to them. And so you want to keep track of all of that and what you're sort of doing. Scholarship is sort of the thing that we all think about, right? Education and learning, so what you're teaching. And if you're teaching in the medical school course, that's seen as differently than just sort of your local residency stuff and important service. And then all your invited lectures, research and grants, and sort of the title, the funder, your role. And you may also either in this area, or sometimes people put it in sort of some of their service. Like if you're involved in big QI projects and parts of committees, don't neglect that that's work that you do, that you are sort of moving that project along in terms of capturing that information. And then your bibliography. It should really be organized. So this is the structure that the UC system uses. If your institution does not use a structure, you really want to sort of break this out, because it is, you don't want to mix up your peer-reviewed research publications with your non-peer-reviewed sort of publications, and sort of it goes by sort of organization of research papers, and it's also chronological. And capture what you do. If you write a piece for SAEM Pulse, it's a national publication, right? It's sort of like you add all these things, right? You're like, oh, I didn't sort of think about it, right? So not everyone is a researcher, and sort of understanding what the lay of the land is and what your institution is going to value, and getting known and getting invited to things, that sort of helps. And then also sort of scientific abstracts that get published, those are sort of separate category, and sort of that actually counts in addition to any presentation that you gave. Okay, so why is it important? So Maggie sort of just tell you why it's important. And having talked to a lot of people, there are, at my institution, it matters a lot because it matters to my retirement. How far I go on the ladder matters. And at other institutions, it doesn't necessarily matter. So some people are like, I can be an assistant forever. It's like, I get paid by years of service in. And I'll tell you it matters, one, because of what Maggie said. There is sort of a pipeline that some people get promoted up, and some people tell you, don't worry about it. It's okay, you don't need to sort of do that. And that's how women got behind. It matters because some of the positions that you want to hold, you may need to be at a different level. And if you have aspirations for other leadership, it may matter what you sort of do and what positions are sort of open to you. So you should care about your promotion, and you should care about keeping things up to date. So as I said, I'm at the UC system, and it's a little bit different than other systems, sort of each of our, from assistant to associate to full, and at full professor, we have steps. So depending on where you are, every 2 to 3 years, you submit a dossier. And so my way of keeping things up to date is I have my CV on my desktop. and I keep it in track change mode. So everything I do, as soon as I do it, I get a publication, I get invited, I give a lecture, I'll put it on my there and I do it immediately and I keep it up. And then sort of when I have to turn in my dossier, it's very easy. It's like, what have you done in the last 3 years since your last dossier? I just cut and paste. And it's very quick, and then I hit, then I sort of accept those changes and then I start fresh. And when I have to submit my CV for a grant, I just hit accept all changes, I export it to a PDF, I sign it, and it's done. And it's always up to date, and I don't have to go back through things and try and figure out what I did or didn't do. It's also important for your yearly review. And so I would tell you, as I said, you should care the most, so you should be doing your own yearly review. Take stock of where you're at. I've been on this committee for a really long time. Am I still getting something out of it? Does it sort of feed my soul? Am I learning? Am I growing? Can I pass this on to someone else who needs that opportunity? And I'm going to then free up some bandwidth to do something else. And so, my residents are always like, I need more feedback. And I'm like, I can give you feedback, but you need to learn how to assess yourself, because not to be so much of a, don't beat yourself up, and to know where you need to be. And then you should meet with someone once a year, and that should ideally be someone at your institution, but if not, find a mentor who looks at stuff, because you want to know someone else to see where are your gaps, because maybe they'll sponsor you. You need to do something, and you don't know how to do it, and that's sort of your opportunity to have that discussion. And then a lot of people sort of say give a backup. So some people choose an email folder, and they call it their CV folder, so every time they do something, they put it there. Or they have a calendar, they put it. And that'll work too if you sort of not keeping up. I find it kind of like, you do your taxes. If you put it all in an envelope at the end of the year, you have to dump that thing out, that whole big envelope, and sort of sort it all. And I hate that because it's a pain to go back through. So if you don't do, I find it easier to keep up sort of in real time. And then it's sort of done, and I'm always sort of up to date. Okay, so then just the last things to think about as you're sort of thinking about all those. It's not all about the CV, so there are letters of evaluation. So how your CV presents itself is how people will sort of see you. And so they're going to look for themes in your CV. They're going to look for the areas that sort of where you sort of are a standout. You'll have teaching evaluations. And then in a lot of places, you'll have to have something that is some version of a personal statement. I know you all thought like, oh my God, I wrote a personal statement for medical school and I never have to write one again. But either you're going to write an education portfolio, some places are called creativity statements, an area of interest, and especially when you're going up for your big steps in promotion, it helps people who are from outside your institution to understand what you are, what you've done that has meaning, and why it's really important, and why you're the standout. So it's your chance to sort of like your pitch of who you are. And then at my institution, we all need a diversity statement. So what we do for diversity, what diversity means to us, what we are sort of upholding, that's actually something that every dossier has to go in with. So understanding some of those things, and you can usually find examples of these on the web, so it's not so complicated just to get that part sort of set.
So I just want to talk for a second about sort of how do you handle gaps in your CV. So you had a medical issue, you need to take time off to care for a family member, your CV has not come together as beautifully as Rochelle just described, and there's a hole somewhere. Because we get this question a lot about sort of what do you do with that? And the answer is don't give up, right? And so there's a bunch of different ways to address it depending on what you're using your CV for. And so one is if you're using it to apply for a grant or an award or a job, you can ask the person who's nominating you to address it in their letter. And I actually have a template that I ask everyone who's requested a letter of recommendation from me to fill out. And one of the things is, are there any gaps that you want me to address in this letter? And if so, can you tell me about them? So that I can make sure to write the strongest letter for you possible. And that way, you as the applicant don't have to feel like you're disclosing more than you want to, and you can let the person who's nominating you speak on your behalf for that reason. But if you're submitting your CV for promotion, there may not be an opportunity to guide your letter writers, because many places you're not allowed to speak to the letter writers who are writing for you for promotion. In that case, you're going to have to use that narrative report section that Rochelle just described to explain what you feel comfortable sharing about what happened. And it is often really tempting to overshare in this section, to be like my mom and then my dad and then my cat and then my dog, and like it was just really hard for like a long time, right? That is not what you want to put there. This is just a brief 1 to 2 sentences about I had 6 months off for the following reason and I'm now back with a highly productive whatever, right? Very short, to the point, factual. They don't need to know how you felt about it. And it's just, the point is to be brief and give the explanation in a limited way. And to the extent that there's anything more that needs to be said about it, then let your chair put that in their nominating letter for you. But it's not fair to ask you to put that in your CV. Okay, Amy.
Do we have any Jamboard questions yet?
We do not.
Has anybody submitted to the Jamboard?
You should have chair access. Yeah, it should be.
I missed the Jamboard, but I do have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you mentioned letters of support in your kind of promotion packet, and I'm very junior faculty. It's something I'm trying to think about, in the next few years, like you said, kind of staying on top of things. And I've gotten some advice of, like, you should consider, as you have residents or mentees that are graduating, to ask them for that letter now, like when at the time of their graduation or around the time of their graduation, even if it might be in a year or two in advance of when I would go in front of any promotion board. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, or is that something that I could like start that process early and then have them revisit the letter later? What are your thoughts on that as a policy?
Usually your letters of support are going to come from people who are sort of your peers or above you in terms of level, as opposed to sort of someone you mentored. Those are more your teaching evaluation sort of things. And but those are also good as sort of like people sort of in terms of like you're going for an award. Those are the people sort of for that part. Most of sort of this is sort of, you can sort of ask people, like people have asked me, people of my former like sort of fellows, people sort of like, will let me know. People will ask me, will you be ready for letter writers? You need someone who's sort of usually like sort of one step removed in some way, that someone who can speak to you who doesn't. We're not sort of close.
Gotcha. I think I'm thinking more of that teaching evaluation.
Which is
as a resident, and I've written a lot of those, like for my faculty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
I would just
be
be,
institution specific.
it's
probably.
really institution
Yeah,
specific
sure.
about what you need and also what you're allowed to say. So at HMS, you're not allowed to speak to your letter writers at all. And if you speak to them, then their letter is excluded. And so you actually like specifically can't do that.
Gotcha.
And they have to be people who are above you in the academic rank. But so just like know what your local context is and what the rules are, and that, because it varies enormously across institutions.
I'm embarrassed to say that I don't remember having to submit one, but I know you wrote me a letter. But I can't remember if I had to submit it for promotion.
I know I wrote it.
Did you have a question? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
had a comment actually, so Doug Tardo actually. May not use it for a letter, but I find that a lot of faculty, especially junior, they say, who have you mentored? They're like, I haven't mentored anybody. I'm like, of course you've mentored somebody. Those are the people that want to write you a letter, they like you, right? So you can say, can I list you as a mentee? There's two things. One, you're able to check off when you mentored somebody, there's a reason for why they like you and stuff. But also, when you look back afterward, it's not awkward, like your name on, I hope you didn't find that I listed you as a mentor, right? There's that awkwardness about who do I list if I don't talk to them and get their permission and stuff.
That's a good point.
And one other comment on that for award and recognition is if you want to put yourself up for an award or have somebody write, those comments and letter or narratives are so helpful, to have your mentee say in their own words, and I can write a letter for you. It's pretty powerful. So you should keep those and solicit those. And there's not just on your CV perhaps, but for other areas of recognition for what you do. That's what I say. It's helpful to keep that. And also if you're having a bad day.
Everybody deserves a nice letter. Okay, how many of you are rule followers? Okay, I didn't think many of us were rule followers, but your CV doesn't have rules. It doesn't say in your CV, there are subheadings, there are headings, but you don't have, there's no one right way to do it. And the reason this is important is because when I was thinking about going up for promotion, I felt like none of my stuff fits. I do work in immigration and immigration detention, and this is not really emergency medicine. So how do I really make this fit? And so, I think I'm going to give you an example, but just think of creative ways of making sure you value all your contributions, because we have all unique contributions. And I think, especially for women in academic emergency medicine, sometimes it's figuring out how to document that unique contribution. And so that's, I would say, my first strategy is, as Michelle kind of mentioned, always document it. So every hour of my day, if I do something work-related, I put it in my working CV draft. And then at some point, I go back and figure out, all right, does this apply to anything? If I spend an hour doing a Stop the Bleed training, or if I spend an hour at a free clinic, or if I spend an hour writing a chart review for a medically vulnerable individual in a detention facility, like that is, I then at the end will go back and say, how can I actually fit this into my CV? So I don't remember who it was, but somebody said, look at your calendar, see what you are doing with your time, and then make that work in your CV. So I think the most important thing is to just document it, even if it's not in a beautiful format with track changes. I have a garbage trash looking document that's called CV Recent, and I put everything in there that I've done, and I'm a dumper, so I go back and then I spend hours going back and saying, like, how can I put this into my CV at certain time periods? So I think the most important thing is just documenting it. What I've noticed is a lot of people do not document what they do. So I looked at a lot of CVs when I was getting ready, and I was like, they put this? I wasn't going to put this, but I'm going to put this now because this person put that. And so I think that's another thing, is just to make sure your contributions are there. And then consider how, even if you think your unique contributions don't fit into the CV, consider how you can scholarize it. So everything can be turned into an abstract that can go at your institution, to a regional conference, to a national conference, whether it gets accepted or not. And so try to put everything you do into an abstract, a didactic, a pulse article. We joke because Maggie's like the queen of getting pulse articles and has done an amazing job at it. Literally everything could go into a pulse article. They're very accepting of pulse articles, and Maggie can help you figure out how to get into a pulse article. And a lot of my work has been at non-EM conferences. I go to a Society of Refugee Healthcare Providers conference most years, and so I submit an abstract with another EM person, and that is widely acceptable because the people who are evaluating your CV are not, or the people who evaluate you for promotion are not necessarily EM physicians. Most of the time they're not. So it doesn't really necessarily matter. So just have a plan of like, how can I turn this into how can I scholarize this in a way to make this applicable on my CV? And then if you feel like you don't have, again, if you feel like you're kind of not the perfect fit, right? You're not like, and I don't do admin, I don't do ops, I do immigration detention work. It's helpful to ask somebody in a near peer in the same field somewhere else or at your institution just to get an example. Because if they're at your institution, again, your institution is judging you by their institutional standards, so it's nice to see somebody else, maybe in the IM department, the FM department, somewhere else. And even an EM person at a different facility, even if their template is a little bit different and their criteria is a little bit different, it's just helpful to see as many as possible. And then again, to make sure that your contributions are emphasized, put it in your personal statement to make it very clear how this applies to emergency medicine. So this is a good example. When I was doing my, making my CV, there's a section for clinical service contributions and I had nothing because I was like, I don't do admin, I don't do QI, I show up and work my shifts, but I don't feel like I contribute clinically beyond that. So I run a human rights clinic, which is, we provide asylum evaluations for those seeking asylum and medical chart reviews for medically vulnerable individuals, and it's clinically relevant. So I was like, nobody said I can't put it there. And if I put everything under service, then it just looks like all I have is service. But I run a clinic, so I put it under my clinical service contributions. And that really helps a lot, is kind of looking at what are the things I have to have, and again, how I can make it fit, because there are no rules. Now, that's for our institution, it works and may be different at other institutions, but I do think it's helpful to think creatively, because again, there's typically a definition under each category, but if you can make it work, then you probably actually, it may not actually be a gap. You've probably already done the work. Okay, so there are guidelines at each institution. Is this my slide? I don't think this is my slide. Maybe it is. It is. Okay, yeah. That's funny. So at each institution, and in a second I'll have you all pull up your promotion guidelines. Every institution is very different. And so it's really helpful to know what you need to do at your institution. So I would encourage you, every institution has a website, and you just have to look at that website and try to dissect it and figure it out. Most often, there's going to be a pathway that you will go up for. So it's either going to be clinical care, typically clinician, scientist, or education. Sometimes you have to have all three, but you go up on a pathway. So for example, I went up on service. Other people go up on education, other people go up on research, but you have to know what those criteria are. So if I went up on research, I'd have to be like an NIH-funded research scientist, which I'm not yet. So I couldn't go up on that now. But that's really helpful. Every institution will have courses, should have courses for you to take, CV building, how to build your education portfolio, how to write a personal statement, that are typically very helpful. And then there's also time limits or like timelines of how many years you may need to be at each level. So for example, and I'll show you a pathway in a different slide, but for ours, you can go up at 5 years, is when you have to be at assistant for 5 years before you go up. You have to be at associate for 5 years before you go up. The caveat to that is when I hit year 4, I had everything. And so I said, why can't I go up at year 4? Because it'll be recognized at year 5 because the whole process takes a year. And so nobody, again, told me no. They said, yeah, you're right, because I kept receipts. I came with the promotion guidelines, and I said, I meet all these criteria, so I don't see why I can't go up right now, because it will be year 5 by the time I get there, because I knew other people had done that. So it's really helpful to kind of know the timeline of like, is it based on really what is on your CV? Is it based on the number of people before you who get promoted who are maybe more senior to you? Is it based on a time, so on and so forth? And know what you're hired at. So at our institution, if you did a 3-year program and a fellowship, or a 4-year program and a fellowship, you'll be hired at an assistant professor. But some places you'll be hired at an instructor level. And that's helpful to know too, because if you're hired at an instructor when you should be hired as an assistant professor, then you've lost some time. So that's an important thing to ask when you're starting somewhere. And then of course have a mentor, you have a promotions committee in your department, but it's also helpful to have a personal board of directors. So I was lucky that my advocate is a great advocate. It's Michelle Law, who many of you know is now our SAEM president. And so she helped me kind of navigate everything. In fact, now that I went up for promotion, the last time I met with her, I said, what do I need to do to become professor? And map out the next 5 years. So it's never too soon. Even if you think you're junior, it's never too soon. So just going back to kind of like these traditional pathways, for the most part, you'll go up on a educator, scientist, or research or clinician pathway. Research is mainly if you don't do clinical research anymore, if you're a PhD, but it's just helpful to know the pathways at your department. This was a survey that was done of all academic medical center chairs and the pathways that they have. So generally, it'll kind of fall into this path. Here's another example of kind of how things move. So this is an example of the promotions pathway at Duke, and again, it tells you how many years and when the tenure clock starts. So you may not all have at your institution a nice figure like this, but there are rules, like there are guidelines to follow. And here's just another example again where you can see the tracks. So I would say, know your track, and you have to kind of model your CV and your personal statement based on that. Okay, instead of going to each of these, I might just pull one up, but in the interest of time, can we do a 1-minute activity where you all just pull up your website promotion guidelines while I go on to the next slide? Because every guideline will be very specific and may give you a table that is helpful. So feel free to do that right now. Okay, finally, as you're preparing, again, know your institution requirements. What I did was the promotion guidelines on our website, they're not interactive. So I sort of made my own document, made my own table, and like checked each one off and said, all right, I have this, I have this, I have this, I don't have this. This is a gap. I don't know what this means. So I have to talk to my advocate about what this means because I don't really understand it. And so that way, when you go to your advocate or you go to promotions committee, you can take that checklist and say, well, I meet all these criteria, so I believe that I'm ready. Okay. All right.
Okay, so like chess, a successful discussion with your leadership oftentimes takes a little bit of strategy. And the first thing I'd always say is really be proactive. You can start talking about the promotions process at the time of hire and start recognizing, like at that point, you can start thinking about what you're going to say yes to, what you're going to say no to, and whether or not it fits your promotion criteria, as well as it will help you decide who you need to network with and become colleagues with so they can write your letters of recommendation. So I have 3 children, and I found that the day goes much easier if I give them an overall plan for the day. We're going to go to the grocery and pick up snacks. We're going to go to the zoo, and then we're going to come home and take a nap. Similarly, chairs like to not be blindsided. They like to know that things are coming well ahead of time. So at your annual review, I usually recommend that you talk about what you've achieved over the last year, what you need to achieve over the next year in order to keep you on track for promotion. Involve your key stakeholders. So most departments or divisions will have a promotions or ARPT committee, so you can talk to that chair or a vice chair who's in charge of faculty affairs, academic affairs, or faculty development. And they can be a real good resource for you. So about a year or 2 before you're going to go up for promotion, I recommend you make a meeting with that person that you trust, have them review your CV and tell you where your gaps are, and then ask them what you can do to fill those gaps and follow up on it and close that loop. In return, they will probably update the chair that they've met with you and that your plan is to go up for a promotion in the next year or 2. So it's like this wonderful feedback loop. So as you were saying, make sure that your CV follows the format of the school or college of medicine, because some places they'll reject you if you don't actually follow it to the T. And know that this CV serves as a roadmap for people who might not be clinicians, because remember the actual school or college of medicine promotions committee is made up of basic scientists, clinicians, et cetera. And so you need to make it as easy as possible for them to see that you've met all the criteria, and then it goes to the dean and then the provost. So make it easy for your chair, make it easy for everybody to see that you meet the criteria right away. Also start thinking about who's going to write your letters of recommendation, which is like you were saying. Some places, like we were saying, lets you choose. So at Cincinnati, you get to choose who writes your letter of recommendations. Sometimes it can just be internal to your department, but sometimes it has to be external to your department or your institution. And then like Maggie was saying, like sometimes you don't get any choice at all, and it has to be completely blinded to you, and you have to have 0 relationship with that person. But when you get a choice, start thinking about who would write those letters and talk to your mentor or the ARPT committee chair or your vice chair and brainstorm who can represent you the best.
Can I pause you there for
Yeah.
a second? If you are an AWEB member,
Yeah, we have a letter writers bureau, and so you can submit your information, and a letter writer will write a letter for you. You don't have to do anything except for submit for stuff. And that was designed because there are not a lot of, there haven't been sort of a lot of women at the level, at higher levels, and you have to have somebody above the level you're going for. So if I'm going up for associate, I have to have an associate write the letter for me. I can have an assistant professor write it for me, and same for professor. And there's even less women professors. And so there was a real need to sort of collate the people that could write letters. And so you can submit your information, and they will pair you with a letter writer. I believe it's anonymous. You won't know who it is. But they'll get your
It's a spreadsheet.
yeah, you could, if you're allowed to submit names of letter writers, you can get it
That's right.
from that spreadsheet.
And it'll say the category, like if you're going up for education or global health or, that's a niche area that you have. Researchers in that category of a certain rank that are willing and want to help support you. So it's an Excel spreadsheet, so you can go through it. And I just did that with one of our faculty who was in, we had to find her niche and where she was and to find some other writers. And you can recommend them at HMS, actually some, they say here or whatever, you can put forward things, not necessarily that they fit if you don't know who it is. But that's
Yeah,
a
I
great
didn't actually
resource.
use the letter writers bureau, but I used all A1 members.
So interesting.
So another plug for A1.
I love it.
Yeah, that's it.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's all good. Because that goes right with what I was saying, which is you don't have to go through this by yourself, right? You can use your mentor as a real great resource to introduce you to people, to network, to actually review your CV annually or every other year to see where your gaps are, and to help sponsor you for projects, et cetera, because you're going to need introductions to people who will write your letters. You can ask your peers, how did they get promoted? Can I see your portfolio? Or you can ask the RPT or promotions committee chair, like, can I see a sample portfolio? Because when you're doing this for the first time, you're like, I don't even know what to include. And so seeing samples is very helpful. By the time you meet with your chair, they should know that this is coming, right? But this is a serious conversation, not a hallway conversation. So you want to make an appointment with them, whether it's at your annual review or a different time. But make sure you have plenty of time to give them warning and to get your letters of recommendation and your portfolio together. And I would always recommend to provide your updated CV ahead of time so that they can review it before your meeting. So as in any crucial conversation, emotional intelligence is super important. So if your chair is in a really bad mood or they're hangry or they're rushed, then consider rescheduling that meeting if you're kind of on the bubble and not a sure thing. And their admin can oftentimes give you some insight as to what their mood is. And so arrive a couple minutes early and schmooze. I do this before every big meeting with my chair because I want to know what mood they're in. And sometimes I'll say, like, I know my meeting's for an hour, but I only need 40 minutes, and I know that they're rushed. So I'll sometimes come in and be like, hey, Art, I only need like 40 minutes. I'm going to give you 10 minutes. I'll come back. And so you can just kind of chill out and organize yourself. Or if I know that he's really hungry, I'll hand him a protein bar and I'll be like, I'm just going to go to the bathroom. I'll see you in a few minutes. And it makes a big difference. Your chair is a human being, and having them start off with gratitude to you for giving them time or food is huge. So use it to your advantage. All right, so know your audience. How does your chair like to best communicate? Most of us revert to a certain way that we do it, but if your chair is like relationship driven, make sure you start off that conversation with a little bit of chit chat. If they're more big picture, then start off by saying, hey, I'm here to talk about possibly going up for promotion this year, giving a little bit of an overview, and let them ask you questions rather than giving them too many details because they'll like tune you out. Whereas if they are really data-driven, you want to start from the beginning, tell them how each step fits all the promotion criteria, and end with, and don't you think I'd be a great candidate to be promoted this year? So it's very easy to fall back on your own communication patterns, but if your chair is in a big rush, use their communication pattern. It'll get you more success faster. Okay, I can't stress this enough. No matter how great of a candidate you are and how everybody tells you you should be promoted, always be humble when you're asking your chair, and don't be presumptuous. Let your chair know that you've really spent a lot of time and effort on this promotion package, and that if you have the endorsement of the people that are in their trusted circle, like vice chairs or the committee chair for promotions, let them know, because that will just give you more evidence for the reason why you're a great candidate to be promoted. And engage your chair. Ask them, what else can I do to make this a stronger package? These are the people I'm thinking about writing my letters. What do you think? Or do you have any other suggestions? And make sure that you always submit your package on time, if not early, because if you submit it late, your chair might ask you to submit it next year instead, especially if they don't like you, which you may or may not know. And it's so true, though. And finally, don't forget to celebrate when you get promoted, because it is a notable achievement. So I always buy myself something special and go out to dinner. And so every time I look at that special thing, I think, hey, I'm a badass. I got promoted.
Awesome. We have a couple minutes left. Nobody put anything on the Jamboard, but we are happy to take any questions if you have any.
I think there were a lot of focus.
Thank you.
I think there were a lot of focus on the institutional templates. As a resident fresh out of residency who might be applying for like 5 different institutions, what templates should you follow?
So you don't need to, when you sort of get a job, then you're going to do your first dossier appointment and you'll reformat it. So in general, you can look at a few different things, but you want to make sure you hit those categories. You make it easy for people to see where you're at. And as a resident, you're not going to have that much, and that's sort of okay. You want to explain your project so people know that.
An easy way to do it as a resident, though, is to just use whatever your home institution's template is, right? Because that's what your faculty is familiar with. That's what they'll be able to advise you on. most of the templates are relatively similar, and then you can revise when you get to your new institution.
And sometimes your institution changes every year anyway. Like ours has changed every year, so we've had to make formatting changes. So like you have to edit it.
That's the time when you ask, is there an assistant who does this?
Yes. Can I
Because
pay someone?
well, there's also, men in leadership tend to get some assistants to do it, and you realize we just spent too much time doing it, and it's sorry, not uncommon. I think a couple of other things we talk about how people get behind, really important for you to know about when you're going places. So people will sort of say, don't worry about it, we'll start here, we'll help move you up. And they don't tell you that there's different tracks, or what it takes to get to different tracks, or where you should start, or which positions are tenure or not tenure. Don't worry about it, no one really gets a tenure spot, but some people do. So I'm in the UC system, University of California system, and there are different tracks. There is the health sciences track, which is sort of based when everyone's in it, easy to get promoted. There is an in-residence track if you are a career researcher, and there are physical requirements for how many first author papers you have to have and what you should do. You get a true sabbatical in your academic senate. And then there's a track that's in the middle that's called Professor of Clinical Ethics, of like sort of your nationally known expert educator in some sort of area. And that is also academic senate. And the last decade when we look sort of across the institution, and not just in the School of Medicine, but on the undergraduate campus, most women were in the sort of most basic series, and most of the people in the academic senate were men. And I sort of, no one ever told me like, hey, you should sort of be anywhere here. And so I'm professor step 4, almost step 5, and I just recently changed series into one of those. Where some I was like, why am I not in academic senate like some other people? And so I had to ask, but no one advocated for me or asked me about that. And so I think it's important to know. And for some of these tracks, as you know, you'll see some of these require a lot more. So like I often sort of recommend people who are interested in research, it takes time to get your feet under you. Get your K, get your R, to get some publications. So I'm like, start the basic track. And usually sort of the time to switch is when you switch from assistant to associate. And then you sort of have a track record, you've got grants, you're going to have papers coming in, and like, I want to change to the next series. You change your series with your promotion. And so those are also things that you need to think about, that if you don't have an advocate, you're sort of like looking at what your trajectory is going to be or what you want it to be, people may not actually do that for you. So be your own advocate.
I have a question for the panel. What do you do about the informal nature of what the criteria are? For example, in general, like the research and publications, there's a understood level. When they see it, they know it, but there's not a number. That is the hardest part, to know what the criteria and what they're looking at. And there is differences, what scholarship is, book chapters, books versus publications. Curriculum is sometimes counted at some places, but each institution, but there's a sort of unspoken, they know it when they see it, how many, when you hit the bar, what the caliber is or what the impact factor. So how do you address that when they're looking? Because, you know, they can look and review your things, but there is a magical number or a magical level that is not clear and not really, even if you look at your criteria, it's an unspoken that they know it when they see it. That I'd love for you to help share your insights on that.
One is that it's, as you say, it's very institution specific. So I started as junior faculty at Penn, and one thing I really appreciated about Penn is they were really explicit. 40 papers before you got promotion, done, right? And then you were like, great, give me a metric, I can hit the metric, right? Like, just somebody tell me what the rules are, and I will follow the rules and get there. And so at the time when I was joining the, like, I was like, wow, 40 papers seems like a lot. That's like super stressful. But on the other hand, it's like, at least somebody told you what the thing was that you were supposed to do. So I have gone back and forth between thinking of that just like intimidates people from going up versus like actually appreciating the clarity ultimately. The second thing is this is a place where the Whisper Network can really help you. Like if you could find people's CV from when they went up for promotion and say, you know, it's interesting because of the like 7 people who've gone up for promotion recently in the department, all of them have had about X papers, and look, I have X papers with similar results. Like that is, I think, really persuasive, and it's one of the things that a really like collegial faculty group can do for each other to try and make sure that people have that data and support to get around those problems.
I think it's one reason, like, start early so that you know, because you know it when you see it. Start early so that when your promotions committee or your applicant looks at it, they can say, you need more of X, even though they can't tell you how many that is. But I feel like at our institution, there is a number, and people like say like, oh, X to X range. But it is very frustrating because my husband was trying to go for promotion, and they said, you don't have enough publications. And he said, oh, how many publications do I have to have? And they were like, a few more, you know?
It's also very, and they say you need more.
But now he knows,
And
because
we
he
go
did it.
oriented, so you're like, well, what is this?
Yeah.
You're
But that's why if you go
mandatory.
early.
So you definitely want to like talk to the person on TNT, but it is very institution specific. And a lot of places, so it's not how many publications you are, it's how many, first off publications, second off publications. Being on a bunch of papers where you're sort of a little author, like sometimes like our, you're like, whatever you did, this person didn't do anything. So how people value stuff, you sort of need to know, that's why I sort of say, know the lay of the land, know the pond you swim in, but also have an idea, especially because you may not know where you're going to be, where sort of the other sort of things lie.
And when you meet with your chair of the year for your annual review, I would say, like, I want to be promoted in 5 years. Am I on track this year? And if they look and they say, oh, your publications aren't up, then you can kind of pin your chair as to, like, how many more publications does that mean?
They say, a couple more.
Yeah. But then you come back the next year and you're like, look, I got 3 more. What's next? Right?
And not every place looks at sort of impact factor of journal, right? So it's like people I know they get struggling, like, oh my God, I need this paper accepted, and like I don't want to do the revision. I'm like so beat down. It's like, hey, let it sit for a little bit, take a clear eye focus, don't take it personal, figure out what can I fix or address, or there's something you can't fix in it. It's like, is there a part of this paper that is self that you can save this component of it and spin it into a different type of publication so that your work doesn't go to waste. So I'm so done with this and I just can't bother, which is sort of, I'm making sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so I think we're almost at time, but don't give up. Know the rules of the road and use the resources that you have both locally and through SAEM.